So let's talk about this £28 billion plan
from Keir Starmer.
From Keir Starmer. Now, the reason that this has made headlines today, ladies and gentlemen, is because there is now a fear within the Labour camp in the run-up to the election that £28 billion was quite a lot of money to promise towards these initiatives, and that actually they're not actually very sure where they're going to find it, and that this might leave them open to one or two criticisms from the Conservative Party, who might say, £28 billion, are you barking mad? So they are now apparently being accused of a potential U-turn on this because they might have to roll back on some of these plans. Now, it's being called flip-flop Keir, watering down these green plans, and apparently pressure within the party has come from Rachel Reeves and others to say to him, look, this is just unrealistic.
Do you not think they should have had that conversation before they announced it? You would imagine,
seem like
you would imagine
normal.
That there would be some kind of conversation between the top table at the Labour Party where some bright spark would have said, I know, let's pander to the Green lobby because that's the fashionable thing to do. Let's say that we're going to become completely sustainable by X date. Someone then says, oh yeah, what's that going to cost? They, I guess in reply, then say, we don't really know, but we should put a number on it because the Conservatives will make us. And then you would imagine that they'd have the debate before announcing it to the public. This is typical of politics, though, isn't it? Where politicians on all sides, simply make an announcement because they think it looks good in the papers the next day, and then have to wonder if it actually is something that might work.
Well, that's the lack of logic around this. Look, I'm going to cut them a bit of slack on this.
Are you being devil's advocate, Cristo?
No, I'm not. Because every time I have a conversation...
I don't think there's any supporting, frankly, either the 28 billion quid wasted on windmills and solar farms when that reduction in carbon will make no difference to the planet whatsoever, or indeed the now impending flip-flop. I can't see how we're going to defend that.
The devil is in the detail, though, because if you were to say to me, and this has always been my stance when it comes to these green issues, I don't mind money being spent if it means that by being environmentally friendly, my life is made better. So I don't mind the government saying, look, we're going to fork out some billions because we're going to make public transport so brilliant and so cost-effective that it becomes a no-brainer to use it. I'm going to incentivise you by saying, look, if you don't have a parking permit for your car, we'll reduce your council tax, and we will take that hit through some of this spending that we need to make. We're going to perhaps, start our own energy company that actually becomes competitive with the major ones, meaning that competition is better within the energy industry, which gives you a better life. If it was that sort of carrot policy, I would be on board with it, because that is precisely the kind of thinking that we need to get people on board with being environmentally friendly.
Rather than the stick, for instance, of ULEZ and the ULEZ expansion scheme.
Absolutely. Or the stick of, a penalty for having a a gas boiler, or the penalty for wanting to use your car and have to pay per mile, and all of those things, the penalty of wanting to get from A to B and finding that all the roads are closed. Because at the moment, every single environmental policy is stick instead of carrot.
Yeah.
So if any government, I don't care what colour the government are, were to announce we're going to come up with some money to make your life better and easier and make it the no-brainer easy choice for you to do the right thing, I would be applauding that right, left and centre. Do you agree with that principle, that if the money was being used in that way, you'd be on board with it?
So I'd obviously agree with any money that's invested by government in making people's lives better, but it depends on your definition of making people's lives better. The problem is the Green lobby, and something that obviously has been picked up by the Labour Party, is they believe that, for instance, net zero as quickly as possible makes lives better. Actually, in the meantime, what it does is to create absolute misery for most people, because the consequence of net zero is getting out of our cars, not being able to have boilers in your house and so on. So the principle of making lives better, which, by the way, is what politicians, that's their only job. That's all they have to do. If the consequence of getting there is worse, so in other words, the medicine is worse than the solution, then I couldn't possibly agree with it.
Well, that is the problem, I think, that we have, because when I've done so many phone-ins on this, and again, we welcome you joining the conversation on this, 0344 499 1000. But I've done so many phone-ins on this, and it's interesting, because when you say to people, are you in favour of net zero? They say no. And then you say, OK, well, are you in favour of net zero if it meant that trains were cheaper and more efficient? If it meant that all those things I just listed, that actually you could keep your gas boiler but there was some way of offsetting it. If you could keep your car but actually using public transport is so much cheaper and more efficient. Most people say yes. Because
but that's not what net zero is. Net zero has a price. And look...
Well, yeah, but that's... Sorry, just to jump in, but that's not the goal. That's the means of getting to the goal. Because most people would agree that us to have less carbon and us to have a nicer environment is a great thing. It's not the goal that people are annoyed about, I would argue. I would argue it's that we don't have a government on either side that has the means to get to that goal, which makes people's lives better.
No, so net zero, by both sides of the political aisle, is a hobby horse. It's a political hobby horse. So on the basis that Britain contributes 1% of carbon to the planet's atmosphere, even if we became net zero, I mean net negative, let alone net zero, it would make no difference to the planet whatsoever. But the consequence of getting there in terms of, you know, turning off all of our boilers, not having internal combustion engines anymore and so on, the cost of the infrastructure that we need to put in for the sustainable energy, the subsidies that will have to be paid for, and indeed from the 28 billion quid that you just mentioned that Keir Starmer announced, he forgot to cost it. You know, he didn't want to admit to the public, which he's about to have to do, that he would have to borrow 28 billion at current interest rates, not the interest rates of 2 years ago at kind of 0.1%. That's what Rachel Reeves is worried about. She's worried about the fact that 28 billion quid can be borrowed, but how do you pay it back? And when you pay it back, you can only pay it back from taxes. So the consequence of 28 billion for a ridiculous endeavour to get to a false net zero, which makes no difference to anybody whatsoever in real terms, is that we will all pay higher taxes for no benefit whatsoever.
What Tony Blair, I think it's actually you're rubbing a little bit on your little grandad cardigan there, so we might need to direct you a little bit differently.
It is actually mine, not my grandfather's. But,
is it? You actually bought that yourself? That's quite the admission.
This is Essex chic.
Is it?
This cardigan.
Well, that's a contradiction in terms, some would say. I do actually believe, and I never thought these words would leave my mouth, but I'm going to say it, I believe that Tony Blair, who, love him or loathe him, he does have an ability of sort of licking his finger and going, this is the direction of travel where politics is going.
At least he's principled.
Yes, and also he knows how to gauge where the electorate is, shall we say, to win elections. He made a good point a few months ago when he said, look, net zero, foisting policies that make UK residents' lives worse in the pursuit of net zero is ridiculous.
Yes.
What we should be doing is spending money.
So Tony Blair agrees with me.
Yeah,
it's good to hear.
But what he said that what we should be doing is using our money and resources in order to assist countries like China and India, who, as you have pointed out, are far more polluting than we could ever hope to be.
75% of all carbon comes from India, China and the United States.
And coming up with ways in which they can maintain their industrial revolutions, but in a technological way that means that they don't have to lose their standard of living, but reducing their net zero plans. And that should be Britain's leading role, rather than this ridiculous idea of we're going to set an example by making everyone's lives here a misery and hope that other countries follow.
But that's
but that was good sense, I thought.
Well, yes, but that's only if you agree that the production of carbon actually leads to global warming. And of course, when we talk about the science and the scientists and following the science, obviously a phrase that was well used during the pandemic, for instance, the scientists do not agree that the production of carbon leads to a rise in global temperatures.
But a lot of scientists do think that.
But there's a significant body that actually says that it's the other way around, that the Earth is warming naturally, as it does periodically over millions and millions of years, like it did when, for instance, it melted the Ice Age because there were no cars or central heating boilers in the Ice Age, as far as I'm aware. So carbon then follows the heat. So my point is, the whole thing is a ridiculous endeavour. We've gone from pandemic being the scary thing to now being convinced that carbon, global warming and net zero on a man-made basis is also now the next scary thing, and I'm not buying it.
And Andy from Thatcham says, where's the proof that they'll be better off with less CO2 in the atmosphere? Well, and Andy, you know, you're reflecting Russell's comments there. There are many scientists who disagree with what Russell's saying, but it's fair to say that there is some disagreement about what causes all of this. Another one here as well saying, when will the government turn off the 42 volcanoes that are active around the world that are emitting gases, says Doug. Thank you. It's Uncle Scrooge in the hot seat today. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. It's Panto season, says Nick.
Oh, yes, it is.
For that. Mick, as well, makes a very good point when it comes to the way in which our country is being run at the moment. And that is, it's not only transport, it's the government, it's the police, it's the NHS. Nobody is accountable. Nobody gets the sack in the public sector. And that is just the way it is. And that is so true. I don't have... It's the first time, I think, that we're going into an election where everything's broken and I don't have faith in any of the people who are going to be up for election to fix it.
Totally agree. And normally what happens, I mean, the current social and economic environment feels a bit like I kind of remember of the 70s, where everything's broken, you know, taxes have increased, we've lost control of the country. The saviour then, of course, is you turn to the centre-right, the centre-right come along and fix it. The problem is the very problems that we have now in society and in the economy have been caused by the last 2 or 3 years of a so-called Conservative government. So there is really nowhere to turn, and no disrespect to Richard Tice and Ben Habib and our own David Ball and so on. I'm not sure that they're quite going to get the traction that's needed to go and take significant seats in Parliament to fix this. So actually what we end up with, I'm afraid, with a Labour government is, I mean, genuinely much, much worse than we have now. So I share your misgivings. Many of us now are politically homeless. I, for instance, probably won't vote for anybody for the first time in my adult life.
Well, do you know, I was going to say exactly the same thing. I don't encourage anyone else to do this, but I think for the first time in my life, I am going to go to the voting polling station, but I'm probably going to spoil my ballot paper.
What we need is the People's Republic of Cristo, don't we?
Well, if there was, that would be the first ethos, would be it's about making your life better. My job as Prime Minister is to help you keep more of your own money, not to take it. But number one job is to help you keep more of the money that you earn, to run decent public services, to drive an economy that can pay for all of that. I would probably be a bit more socially liberal than you, as much as that I would want equality for everyone. Not that I'm saying you don't want that.
I actually do.
You do want
Absolutely
that.
Want
but,
that. But genuine equality, not a forced headline-grabbing equality that is exaggerated and biased.
Well, I agree with that.
Yeah.
So actually, I probably wouldn't be a million miles away from you. Good God, that sent a chill down my spine. And
Can I be your deputy leader? No is the answer I think they were looking for.
You could be in charge of our Remain policy.